Hello and welcome to the I Can Do podcast with Benjamin Lee. We're here to talk about tips and strategies to have an I Can Do mindset. Life is what you put into it. Get the most you can. Here's your host, Benjamin Lee.
We are back. It is Monday, another episode of Money Monday. There is a book that I listened to on Audible probably a couple of years ago. After I got done listening to it, I actually felt nervous, scared, I think guilty. The book is what I now have in my hands, a paperback copy. It's called The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Timeless Lessons on Wealth, Greed, and Happiness. The reason why I felt that way was because I knew I was guilty of a lot of the things that he had said. That money is often not so much how much we make, although that could be the case for many people, but what we do with it, the psychology, what happens between our ears when it comes to money. There's so much to unpack, and we've talked a little bit about this, right? Money scripts. I've talked about this with a previous guest, this idea of money scripts. Monica Kaufman talked about this, of different lessons, different things we've learned from money or about money going back to our childhood. So much of money and debt, reoccurring debt, going back and forth. I've been debt free. I've had things all paid off. I've gotten myself back into debt. Maybe that's upward limiting. But so much of this goes to the psychology of money. I want to read a couple of thoughts here. On page number 20, one of the things that stood out to me in this book that I think should give us perspective. Chapter 1 is called No One is Crazy. And he talks about just how new so many tools and resources we have, as he talked about retirement, for example. He said this. He said, before World War II, most Americans worked until they died. A lot of people today, I want to retire early, but most people worked until they died, which is what I want to do. Retirement, it's something that a lot of people talk about, but, from the very beginning in the book of Genesis, before there was ever sin, there was work. Work is a good thing, I believe. Work is a blessing from God. And so before World War II, most Americans worked until they died. That was the expectation and the reality. The labor force participation rate of men age 65 and over was about 50% until the 1940s. Social Security aimed to change this, but its initial benefits were nothing close to a proper pension. When Ida Mae Fuller cashed the first Social Security check in 1940, it was for $22.54 or $416 adjusted for inflation. It was not until the 1980s, check this out, that the average Social Security check for retirees exceeded $1,000 a month adjusted for inflation. More than a quarter of Americans over age 65 were classified by the Census Bureau as living in poverty until the late 1960s. So many of the resources that people have today are fairly new. Retirement wasn't really a thing until less than 100 years ago. He said there's a widespread belief along the lines of, quote, everyone used to have a private pension, but this is widely exaggerated. Employee Benefit Research Institute explains only a quarter of those age 65 or older had pension income in 1975. Well, that's good to hear because I don't have a pension, and a lot of people don't, evidently. Among that lucky minority, only 15% of household income came from a pension. The New York Times wrote, he says, in 1955 about the growing desire but continued inability to retire. To rephrase an old saying, everyone talks about retirement, but apparently very few do anything about it. A lot of people, I think, are still in the same boat right now. We know that we are supposed to save, so why don't we save? We know that there's going to be a rainy day, so why don't we save money for that future moment so that we can have it available? So much of this is just psychology of money. He goes on to say this: it was not until the 1980s that the idea that everyone deserves and should have a dignified retirement took hold. And the way to get that dignified retirement ever since has been an expectation that everyone will save and invest their own money. Let me reiterate, he says, how new this idea is. So sometimes people feel overwhelmed. This is Ben talking here. Sometimes people feel overwhelmed, like, what should I do with an IRA or 401k, and how much should I save? And I think what he's arguing is it's because so many of these things are really new. He goes on to say the 401k, the backbone savings vehicle of American retirement, did not exist until 1978. That's 47 years. The Roth IRA was not born until 1998. Think about that. The Roth IRA, you go on TikTok and Instagram, everybody talks, financial advisors, the Roth IRA. It certainly is something really good to have, but it's only been around 27 years. If it were a person, he says, barely able to do certain things, it should surprise no one that many of us are bad at saving and investing for retirement. He says, we're not crazy. We're just all newbies. Same goes for college. The share of Americans over age 25 with a bachelor's degree has gone from less than 1 in 20 in 1940 to 1 in 4 by 2015. That's good. But when you think about the cost of college, and by the way, I heard about, I think, is it James Dyson, the guy who made the Dyson vacuum? He's created his own college. It's fantastic. You need to look it up, where people, students can learn engineering. They work 3 days a week. They get compensated, I believe, for their work while also going to school a couple of days a week. So they're learning, they're going to school, and they're getting paid to go to that college. Maybe I can do an episode on that a little bit later on, but there's so many different ways, I think, to think more about education in college. A lot of people today don't even want to touch the different trades that are out there, where a lot of opportunities are there. College is not the only option. Serving in the military, that's another option as well. He goes on to say the average college tuition over that time rose more than four-fold adjusted for inflation. Something so big and so important, hitting society so fast, explains why, for example, so many people have made poor decisions with student loans, guilty, over the last 20 years. He says there is not decades of accumulated experience to even attempt to learn from. We are winging it. Same for index funds, which are less than 50 years old, and hedge funds, which didn't take off until the last 25 years. Even widespread use of consumer debt, mortgages, credit cards, and car loans did not take off until after the Second War, when the GI Bill made it easier for millions of Americans to borrow. I'll stop there with respect to this book. Just think about how many new opportunities, resources, avenues, tools there are when it comes to saving, but also getting into debt. And that's why he calls this first chapter, No One's Crazy. So much of this is new. We don't have a lot of experience. But to sum up, as we think about money for today and the psychology of money, I think we all can understand the value that we know that eventually we're not going to keep making the same amount of money. We know that eventually something bad, something that was not planned, is going to happen. Living here in Texas, we had Snowmageddon in 2021. We had COVID around the world in 2020. We know that there are unseen events and circumstances, health issues, emergencies that are going to happen. Why don't we sometimes save and at least prepare to some extent? I think it goes back to our psychology. So maybe we need to start focusing on and working on, what story am I telling myself? Do I constantly say to myself, I don't have enough money? Now, maybe that's true, but maybe we can look at our budget and see, oh, you know what? I actually do have enough money. I'm actually losing money here. Maybe we can see that we actually have enough money if we start budgeting. That's a great resource, and I'd recommend YNAB, YNAB. You need a budget. So much of our money troubles comes from our psychology, and our thinking. So be careful with how you think today. Be careful with the impulse shopping. Be careful with thinking that physical things will just automatically change and make us feel better. So much of this is psychology, and we'll talk more about this. Be sure to leave me a review. Love to hear from you. If you have questions, if you like to have me discuss something, you can email me at icandocoaching@pm.me. Take care. God bless.